Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back after the holiday break. I hope you have a wonderful break. And welcome to week 8 of cybersecurity management. And in case we haven't met, my name is Aing, and I'm a senior lecturer at School of IT, and I will be taking over the remaining 3 weeks of this unit from Jamal. And yeah, before we begin, anyone want to share any interesting story, any interesting thing that you did during the holidays, besides studying for the unit, of course? Oh, wait a minute, we have a hand from Simba. Yes, Simba, you want to ask a question?
Hi, An. I don't necessarily have anything interesting I'd like to share with
Okay,
with everyone, but I just have a quick question.
right.
Is there like a case study available for assignment 3?
I think all the assignment based on the case study from the assignment 1, as far as I
Assignment 1.
understand. Yeah,
Oh, okay, cool.
yeah.
And yeah, like the last question I want to ask is when are we going to get the results for the second assignment back?
Okay, I think Gemma has mentioned it. I don't know where, but I think we allow for 5 days of grace time plus um, 15, no, plus 10 more days for markings, all in working days. So I think if you account with the holiday as well, so we're still about 1 or 2 weeks away from getting the due date for the release of the result for assignment 2. I
Okay,
mean,
cool. Thank you.
if we can do earlier, then we would release it earlier, of course. Yeah, but that is
Okay, cool.
that's the timeline that we are working on.
Okay, cool. Thank you. Thanks, An.
Thanks. Yeah. Anyone have other questions, or do you have any interesting story to tell about the holidays? Okay. Any question about the upcoming assignment too? If you want to ask, I try my best to answer them. If I can't, then I would defer you to Jamal. But if you have any question right now, you can ask. Okay, cool. So I guess we can just dive straight into the content of this week. Okay, so this week we start to talk about some of the security management models that are available for you to use. So in the past, from the beginning, I think in the past 7 weeks, we learned about some of the key components in cybersecurity management. We learned about the fundamental of cybersecurity, about the laws and ethics that apply to the practice, about the policies, about how to do risk and how to do planning, right? So you might step back and think like, where do we get all of this information from? Like, is there a systematic way that guide us through all of these components? Like, how do they all link together, right? And this week explained like the sources that you can that you can use to put all of this component together. Okay, and the purpose of this week is to tell you, basically to explain, to describe to you what's available for you to go and find more information about. And specifically, this class will um, allow you to recommend an information security management model. And importantly, it let you explain the differences between some of the terminology that is used in different documents and different references that you find online. And it also lets you apply those framework, those documents or those standards to solve um, the problem that's specific to the organization. Okay. Um, as I said, the purpose of this week is only for exposure, right? We will not discuss in details like specific point in those documents, but we just want to explain what are out there. And here are some of the um, references that you can use for further reading for this week. And again, this week content is based heavily on excuse me, on chapter 8 and 9 of this textbook that we've been using from the start, which is Management of Information Security by Whitman and Martin. Okay, so why do we need a cybersecurity management model, right? So we need to start from somewhere. We need some references, some guide, some like documents that tell us what to do, right? In particular, in order to create and maintain a secure environment, which is like to maintain a good security posture for the company, you will need to do like at least two things. First, you need to have a working security plan. Okay, remember we spent week 3, the entire week, on planning for cybersecurity, right? So how do we back in week 3 we discussed like what are the component of planning and why planning is important. But what missing in week 3 is like what are the step that you can um, do to design a working security plan. Like what is the step that you have to go through? And then once you have the plan, you have to implement it, right? You have to execute it. So how do you translate from a plan to an execution? Yeah, how do you implement it? And more importantly, it's not, as we said from the beginning, security is not just a one single solution. It is a process. So because of this nature, you have to maintain the plan. You have to keep evolving the plan to deal with evolving security threats, right? So one of the important part of the cybersecurity management model is how you can maintain the plan and how you evolve the plan. And luckily for us, there's some documents out there, some very smart people out there have like consolidated all of this wisdom into some document that we can use. Okay, so now let's try to unpack some of the terminologies that we see being thrown around a lot. Okay, so how do we design a working security plan? There's a few terminology here. The first is framework. I think the order here is a little bit uh, not correct. So I will start with framework first. Okay, so framework is the outline of the design and the selection and implementation of some control that you need to use in the context. And blueprint is basically a more concrete instantiation of the framework, right? So it describes in detail, more detail, the existing control and um, existing control and identify other control that is needed to implement the framework. Okay, so you've seen a lot of this framework and blueprint and model as well being used interchangeably. And in this unit we use, I mean, in practice, I think we can use them interchangeably too. But just for the sake of completeness, we try to distinguish them in the small level of details here. And let me try to emphasize this. The framework is more high level, right? And blueprints is more concrete, where the blueprint is, you can think of it as a implementation of the framework. It's a more concrete implementation of the framework. It's not an implementation because blueprint is still in papers, right? But it's a very detailed plan. And blueprint is based on the framework. And the frameworks, again, is outlined the design and the selection of some of the security control to achieve some goals. So I think it's maybe a good idea to pause here to see if you have come across some of this terminology in the line of work, and do you have the same interpretation of what framework means and what a blueprint means in the context of cybersecurity, especially for those of you who have um, implement some standards, for example. So how do you interpret this terminology? Is it like we interpret them here, or do you have a different or do you give it a different meaning? Just raise a hand if you want to discuss, or type it in the chat too. So how do you understand framework? And how do you understand blueprint? And I think one more extra question is, what do you think the difference between a framework and a model? Here we have this like cybersecurity management model, right? And here we have this word framework. What do you think their main differences are? They may not be very important, but for the sake of completeness, let's try to clearly distinguish them then. Yeah, you see the word model used in this slide as well, where it said that you need to implement a security management model to execute and maintain a plan. So what do you think the difference between the model and framework and blueprint? Anyone? At the level of detail, yes, Andres, do you want to elaborate on that? Can you give an example? Like at what level of details a model is and versus blueprints would have?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Ah, great. Well, how I understand it, the blueprint would be basically outlining the list of the basic controls, like for like what do we think the security in the company will be consist of. So we're going to have this, and that. Where the framework would be the basically a set of tools to implement this, and the model will be actual working model when you implement these tools and they work together and you have some synergy between the tools to create all around security for the company.
So you think the frameworks like consists of tools?
Well, in programming frameworks is a set
Hmm.
of tools essentially, a set of libraries. So I assume this is probably something in the same
Mm.
ballpark.
I think it's very interesting that you give an analogy of framework here. Yep. So framework is very similar to the framework in programming language, right? And you mentioned it as a set of tools. In a way, it is, yeah, in a way, it's a set of tools, but is this a random set of tools, or is there a way that they are related?
Now, this will be the set of tools outlined by the blueprint. So basically, blueprint would say what generally we need to have. Let's say we need to have a firewall, we need to have some policies. When the framework would be those elements already in certain form, ready to be used or already in use, let's say.
Hmm. Okay. And how about a model then? If you link,
So,
if you use analogy of programming language, then what is a
so the model will
model there?
be implementation based on built on these tools, basically working some working entity which use this tool together to collaborate, integrate them into one suite of protection.
Mm, interesting. Okay, so the interpretation is very different to what we have here, where you say the framework is very low level and blueprints is a bit higher level, and model is at the lower level as well, right? So blueprints
Model
to
will be the
you
highest level to me. It will be already working system,
is a
something we
working system.
something we put together already and kind of maintain now.
Mm. Okay. Right? I think that is one interpretation with the programming language, and yeah, and I agree with part of it. Yeah, of course. I think the framework one is a core here. Um, anyone else? Anyone else? I think this interpretation is of this terminology in programming language may be very different if you using this term in other contexts, right? Not programming language, but in management, for example. Yeah, in management, you might use these terms with the different meanings. So anyone have an experience with this terminology in the line of work and you want to share with us? Yes, Darby. Yeah.
Not necessarily in my line of work, but from my interpretation, like blueprint needs to have a bit more specific, um, like things
Mm-hmm.
inside.
Yeah.
Because like a blueprint of like, let's say architecture, you kind of need more details.
Yep. Yep. That's good. How
And
about a
then
model? How about a model in the analogies with architecture?
um, I'm not very sure, but is it like, I'm guessing, is it the type, like it's a type? Like there's been there's several models,
Hmm.
existing models,
Okay.
um, and therefore you model them.
Hmm. Yeah, I think you have a very interesting analogy of the architecture here. When we think about building a house, right? I think we use this terminology a lot, and I think I agree with you that the blueprint is a more detailed of the framework, and the models, the definition of model, which you are a bit unsure about, right? But I think in the context of architecture, the difference between the blueprints and the framework is quite clear. Where the framework is like the frame of the house, right? You say like, okay, here's the roof, and here the walls, and here's the windows, and here the door, and how all the bars are connected to each other to like pop up the house, right? So this is a frame. And the blueprint, as you said, is adding more detail. Like, okay, here's a light, and here's a pipe, and thing like that. Is that correct? Is that correct way to interpret the point? Yeah. So let's stick with the analogy of the house and architecture then. Then in that sense, what do you think a model is? And how is this different to a framework and a blueprint? And I think it shares some similarity with what the examples that Andres have of programming language. A model, I think in both cases, they describe a working systems, right? Like some sort of like a prototype. I think SW mentioned is a prototype. So when you go and view a house, when it is being designed, you see a model of a house, right? So which is like a a, a high level shape of the house and the main features of the house. But in that sense, you can say that a model is a little bit of a higher level, higher at more abstract level than a framework. Yes, Dabi. Yeah.
Um, I don't know if this is a good analogy, but is
Mm.
it like like for example, in an architectural sense, the model of a house, like what type of houses are there,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
and like maybe like a model of like, oh, is this like a functional, like the function of the room, like for example, this is like a kitchen model, this is like a
Mm.
bathroom model.
Yep.
So like like a security management model might be like serving different areas
Yep.
of.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So would you say that a model is at a higher level, like have less detail than the framework, or more detail than the framework?
Um, oh, maybe so higher than a blueprint, but
Yep.
then maybe slightly lower than the framework.
Lower, you mean it mean at more abstract or more details? Do you think it's more
More,
abstract or more detailed?
hmm.
Mm. I think
I'm
that's something
just
to yeah to think
yeah,
about.
I'm just guessing, but maybe slightly more 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 abstract. I don't
Okay.
know. I'm just
Yeah.
guessing.
Well, I think this is a good to think. This good topic to think about. Um, any other comments on this like subtleties here?
Well,
I yeah. Go on.
I might say that I mean, according to this slide, whatever this says, as far as I understand it, the model would be basically the but let's say if blueprint would describe what controls and what features our security system need to have or has already, and the framework would be when we actually choose actual tools or build actual tools which will help us to build our system,
Mm,
right? Then the model would be how we're going to use these tools together. So to be like I'm not sure if that will be like a prototype or just this description of say like we're using this and this system together. This data go to that system, they go to this system. Uh, that system rises this type of flux, something like that.
mm,
Yeah. So model will be basically the model of our security, how it's supposed to work.
yeah. I think you have a very good point there, and I think this discussions I think demonstrate that the different interpretation of these three terms, right? And if you define them in in the technical context, like programming languages or computer science, you have a different interpretation. If you define it in in the creative arts or creative space, like architecture, you may have a different interpretation. And yeah, so I think in most cases, when you work in the field, I think you can use them interchangeably. Yeah, and there's some other terminology like standards as well, and and sometimes you can use them interchangeably, and the audience can sort of like understand what you mean in context. But if it's not clear, then people will ask you to explain what you mean by them. But I haven't seen many people have trouble understanding when you talk about like the ISO standard or when you refer them to as ISO frameworks yet. So yeah, so it's safe. So you can use this at least the word framework and the model interchangeably. For the blueprint, I think I would recommend you to take a look at this books, right? Where it sort of like give you a very good distinction of what the blueprint is versus a framework. And yeah, well, I mean, to summarize there, in this book, in this reference, what they define as blueprint is actually an instantiation of the framework, right? So the framework is very generic because it's designed for different organization. And the blueprint is that you take that framework, you instantiate it with the organization context. And if you want to stick with the programming language analogy, then you can see the framework as a class and the blueprint as an object. Right? It's a instantiation of the framework with more details. Okay, so now see again here we see a different terminology called standards, right? And um, just to avoid further confusion, I think when you see the industry standards in cybersecurity, you can think of them as a framework as well, or model, right? So standards in cybersecurity include frameworks, guidelines, and best practice, and they are developed by smart people. So people who work in recognized bodies like NIST or ISO or IEC, and their work has been adopted universally as a guide for organization in managing cybersecurity risk. It's not only for the company to implement, but it's good for the external to see how good the security posture of each company is by checking like which standard has been applied by that company, right? And those standards, their goals is to help the organization to protect their assets from cyber threats and to ensure security of sensitive data and to enhance security posture, maintain compliance with legal and regulatory requirements. I think this is very important points here, because most of the company in the world cannot afford a legal teams, right? So we it's better if we have some documents somewhere that spell out all of the steps that we need to take in order to comply with the laws. So this documents helps a lot in that sense, right? So the team in the company may be very skilled technically, but we don't have, I mean, those people don't have a legal training. And so if you have a document to guide them what to do to comply with the law, that'd be much better. So yeah, so this is the benefits and the nature of standards or frameworks or guidelines and why they are important. Okay, so the first model that we're going to talk about today is the security management model. Okay, so we have been talking about different components of this model in the past 7 weeks, right? So now it's just time to step back and to see like what are the model used in the industry and how they organize those components that we have been learning about. A security management model outline the steps that an organization should take to establish a secure environment, right? So you can see from this definition, the model here basically contain a number of steps that organization can take, right? So you can interpret it as a um, more detailed implementation of the framework, or you can also argue that it is because it's a step at the high level, so it's even more abstract than the framework. I think whatever implementation is, as long as it's clear that it's contains a list of steps, then that is good enough. So this model allow the people, allow the user to customize it with different contexts, right? So again, we can see that here that the model is designed to be general, and it can be customized to different contexts, right? It cannot be too specific. So it means that it cannot spell out like the name of the technology, the vendor that sells a certain technology, because it must remain general. And in practice, there's a lot of models out there, and we will discuss some of them in this lecture. And one of them, the first one, is very important because it is in the Australian context, and the others are internationally known, right? So these are the options that you can use as a first step to implement security for the organization. So it's mean the first job as a cybersecurity professional for a new organization is to pick one of this model, or you can mix and match them. And the next step is to customize it to the organization context. Okay, so we will go through some of them here. And if you have any experience with using any of this model, yeah, please raise a hand and then share with us the experience working with this model. All right, so let's start with the thing that is very close to home, which is the Australian Signals Directorate Essential 8, or we just call Essential 8, right? So this Essential 8 is provided to us by the government, of course, and it takes what we call a maturity model approach. We will talk about it later. And what does this mean, right? And how is this different to the other approach? And this Essential 8 is flexible enough so that people can customize it to based on the organization risk profile and the maturity level. The benefit of this essential 8 is that it's reduce the risk of cyber attacks and do all the other things, right? So now let's take a look at the essential 8. I think we can just do it right now. So let's pop in Google and let's search for ASD essential 8. Okay, so here you can see that my Chrome here, and if you take a look at the very first link, essential 8 explain, then you can see what it is, right? So essential 8, basically it assess the security of the organization and assign some level to the security posture. Okay, so it's called a maturity level. The more mature you are, the higher the levels of maturity, the better security you have. There are a few level from level 0 to level 3, so we can sort of like discuss level 0. No one wants to be at level 0, right? So level 0 means that there are weaknesses in the organization. There are glaring weaknesses in the organization. For example, you have a default password for everything. For example, that is really bad. So this is maturity level 0. The next level, level 1, the focus is malicious actor who are content with simply leveraged commodity tradecraft that is widely known. Okay, um, so malicious actor can opportunistically using publicly available exploit or vulnerability. So it means that the bar to compromise the system is not very high. The system will still be compromised, but at least um, at least the victim, at least the attacker, will need to spend some effort to break into the system. That is level 1. And in level 2, it said that the effort it takes to break into the system is higher than level 1. Okay, so it requires a modest step up in capability from the previous maturity level. So it means that the attacker will need to invest a little bit more time and more money, and may need to customize some of the tools, right? And the last one is maturity level 3. So so this one is very advanced. Attacker can only advanced attacker can break in to the system, right? So this is level 3 is where we all want to be, but I think most of the time people would most of company would be hovering like around level 1 or level 2. Yeah, so this is a basic of Essential 8. Okay, so does anyone here have experience with working with the Essential 8 maturity model in the line of work? Or have you like do some research on this one and you want to share it with the class? I personally never work with this model directly, so it'd be good if you have a more hands-on experience with this.
Hello, Professor.
Yeah,
I
hi
have
Shuna. Yeah,
read a bit about like essentially, but I was still confused about how does this manage zero-day vulnerabilities? Like that is something I didn't find in the documentation.
yeah. I think Essential 8 is because it adopt what we call the maturity model approach, right? So it only concerned with what control that you have put in the system. It's about assessing what you have already and give it a label whether you are in level level 1 or level 2. It does not tell you exactly what you need to do to identify 0 days. I think for 0 day, then all of this, then we are all vulnerable to 0 day, right? So, and it's impossible to defend against, because as the name suggests, 0 day is 0 day, right? So there will be no defense against 0 day attack. It's more about like what you have to manage existing attacks, I think, and sort of like to mitigate the risk of 0 day. You cannot avoid it altogether. Yeah. So that's what I understand about this essential aid.
Yeah,
It's more of the
thanks.
guidelines. It's more of the guidelines, more of the high level checklist to see what you have and compare that checklist with the maturity level that can be assigned to you. Yeah. Anyone
Thanks,
else have?
Bruce.
Yeah, thank you. Anyone else have questions or comments about this essential aid? Yeah, I think all of this framework or model, they claim very similar set of benefits, right? Reduce the risk of attacks and enhance securities. I mean, of course, it's the goal of all the model, but like different model, different standard will have a different level of details and different priorities. But like their goals can be very similar. Okay, so that is about essential eight, and we will come back to this maturity model approach later and try to construct it with different models, the more popular one. Okay, so the next model is called COBIT, Control Objective for Information Technologies. Okay, so this one is developed by the ISCA, which is information, just international system for control or something. The C here is for control. I'm not sure. I don't remember the exact um, abbreviation here, but it's something to do with control here. And this COBIT is a comprehensive framework for governance. Remember the word governance and management of enterprise IT. Okay, so you can see here that this one is designed specifically for IT, right? And I think we have a discussion in week 2 or week 3 on the role of IT versus the role of cybersecurity. And I think back then there's a Venn diagram where we see that there's some overlap between IT and cybersecurity, but they are non-overlapping parts as well, right? So this one is designed specifically for IT, so it means that it may not cover many of the aspect of cybersecurity. For example, it might not cover aspect regarding related to laws or human resources or staff training, etc. and etc. But it's quite comprehensive, and it has been used, I think, quite widely in the past. I'm not aware of whether it's being used very widely today, but in the past, it has been used a lot, especially when cybersecurity is used to be like a subset of IT. Okay. Anyone here has experience with working with COBIT, and would you like to share the experience working with this model? Okay. If not, then we can move to the next model. Okay, so the benefit of COBIT, as I said, the benefit, all of this model, they have a very similar benefit, and it's just like the different way of framing them. All right, and we can move to the big one now. This one is NIST, Cybersecurity Framework, or CSF. It is developed by National Institute of Standard and Technology in the States. And this one here is where you first see the term risk-based framework. And I'd like you to construct it with the maturity framework, maturity model approach versus a risk risk-based approach for managing organization risk and cybersecurity program maturity. Okay, so before we move on to discuss some of the detail of this, I'd like to pause here and ask you to think about the difference between a risk-based framework and a maturity-based framework. And we see the example that essentially what is a maturity-based framework is basically some level, right? You have level 0, level 1, level 2, or level 3. And what do you think this risk-based frameworks is different? I mean, why didn't NIST stick with the maturity model that that's used in Australia? Why does it specifically say it is a risk-based framework? What do you think? Why do we need a risk-based framework versus a maturity level framework? Is this good enough to have a label in the first organization that say that, okay, according to Essential Ed, I'm at level 2? Is that good? Is that is that good enough? Why do people still propose this risk-based framework here? Yes, Debbie. Yes.
Is it because every like business have their own appetite for risk? Like they will take certain risks for this sector, but
Yeah.
not that. And
Yeah.
then maturity is it's kind of too wide. There's
Too wide.
too many. Like you kind of like if you say, "Oh, I'm at maturity too," but like in what sector? It's very general, maybe too
Mm.
general.
Too general. Okay. And what is the disadvantage of being too general then? I mean, if I'm the company and if I can do level 2, right? Is that good enough? I mean, so you are talking about it being too general, but let's assume that you can achieve level 2. Is that good enough for you?
Maybe it is not good enough. Maybe
Okay,
you need
why
to
why is that?
you need to be able to more specifically tell which area is secure and which is not. Maybe.
Hmm. I think you are in the very right direction there. I think we just need a bit more specific, I think more elaboration on why this risk-based framework is useful for the organization. And you mentioned that the maturity base is too general, but we want to narrow down on the benefit of following this risk-based framework. And you mentioned risk appetite there, yeah, which is quite broad. Okay, we want to follow that thread, right? And to see like and to elaborate on why different organization would be beneficial to take up this risk-based framework rather than following this maturity-based framework. Anyone else want to chime in?
Raj. So I
Yep.
believe that there are two approaches. One is risk-based and second is maturity-based, mainly because of their requirements of how to secure the system. In risk-based, what we perform is aggregate all the vulnerabilities and like their subsequent attacks and focus on the ones which will cause the most of the damage and
Yep.
mitigate it first.
Yep.
While in the maturity model, we go from the easiest to hardest, one step at a time. Both have their different advantages and disadvantages. In case of maturity model, it's easier to implement and costs less, while as in risk-based model, it will provide us better security. But there can be situations such as a company which might not be able to implement such controls to implement like the more complex ones immediately. So in that case, I believe maturity model is something that they should select. That's what I believe.
Hmm. I think you raised many interesting points there, and I like to focus on one point that you said that the risk pay may give you more security, right? So you mentioned somewhere that the majority may be easy to implement and cost
Yeah.
less, but you said that the risk pay can give you more security. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah. So as I said, like we first need to like sort the vulnerabilities based on how much
Yep.
damage that they
Yep.
do,
Yep.
and yeah, based on our like risk appetite, we need to prevent the vulnerabilities and the like attacks which will
Mm.
cause the most damage.
Yeah.
So in that case, I believe risk-based frameworks are the ones which we should use.
Okay. So you mentioned that you prioritize it, right? And focus on the one that most damaged. Does this translate to higher security?
That
Because
is an interesting.
because the
Yeah.
original point was that this risk-based framework can give you higher security, right? Um, is that because of what you just mentioned, being you sorting out the list of all the vulnerability and focus on the most important one? Is that right? Is that what you
Yes,
want to
that
say?
is correct.
All right, that's very good point. I think I'm kind of agree with that too. Um, Darby, yes, you want to add something? Darby, I think your hand is up. You want to
Oh,
comment? Yep.
sorry, I was muted. Um, I just wanted to add to my point just now. I was trying to say, like with risk-based framework,
Mm,
it's more pointed. Like organizations can prioritize, like they can identify the risks that they that would pose like the greatest threat to them,
yep.
and then prioritize it and like kind of align it with their goals,
Mm,
with like their own companies
yeah.
like specific goals. So yeah.
And what do you think the benefits of doing it that way? I mean, yeah. What is the main advantages of doing it that way?
Maybe it's more um like it can be customized. It's a bit more
Mm,
flexible, and you can adapt it to your company's like specific risk profile and what you want to tackle the most. And it could
yeah.
be, it's probably a little bit, depending on how it is, it could be more cost effective because you
Mm,
can put the resources in areas that you want to protect the most.
yep. Yeah. So I think that's just a great point that is cost effective. And it's a little bit different to what Shunak was mentioning before when he said that the maturity base may be easy to implement and cost less. Um, but I think I would agree with Darby that if you take a risk-based framework where you focus the resources in addressing the most important one, the most pertinent one to the context, then I think you would save some resources there, right? Because it's more, as you said, more pointed, more focused instead of spreading the resource evenly in order to achieve level one or level two. You can just focus on the threat that is most important to you and most imminent and most damaging to the organization. And a flip side of that is that you can enhance security because you sort of like um, targeting the one that is most likely to happen, right? So at the least you'll be able to defer the attack for longer because now you're not treating all the threat equally. You prioritize on the one that is most likely to happen and most damaging to the organization. So in a sense, I would agree that that would bring higher security to the organization. Yeah. So both very great point. Anyone else want to discuss the difference of the risk-based framework to the maturity-based framework?
Well, I would maybe
Yeah.
add that the risk by itself is has two parts. It's either something which have a high probability of
Mm-hmm.
happening,
Mm-hmm.
or something which has a high cost of damage if it happens.
Mm-hmm.
So either or both has to be true for this to be valued high. So by focusing first on high risks, we kind of mitigating the most dangerous part of the security for the company, security risks. So we're kind of getting results faster, because if we will just implement some framework which will say we have to do this, this, and this, you might be focusing and spending time on things which not likely to happen or not likely to create much damage, and then overlook something which actually would create a lot of damage. So by plugging first whatever is most pressing, we ensure that risks dramatically decreases straight away as soon as we start working, not sometimes in the future.
Yep. Yep. So I think that would further substantiate the point raised by that discussed by Chunak and Dabil earlier, that this is a better way to manage our resources, right? And you should deal with the more important vulnerability first, because it comes back to the principle that you cannot have 100% secure system. So you should deal with the most obvious one first, and manage the risk of the rest, right? So the risk base is more pointed, it's more focused. And I think you'll be glad to know that most of the cybersecurity framework, the modern ones these days, are risk-based frameworks, right? Not only NIST, but the ISO framework as well. They also based on risk. Right? So what we have learned in the past 2 weeks is very important, right? Because in the past 2 weeks, we went through the exercise of like assessing the risk and treating the risk, right? And this is very relevant to this framework. Yeah, this framework rely on the fact that you have done some risk assessments, right? And you have identified the things that are important for you to protect.
Professor, I had
Yes.
doubt in one scenario regarding this. So
Mhm.
there can be corporations wherein they don't have a budget for like implementing cybersecurity controls.
Yep.
So in that case, risk-based frameworks, like using risk-based frameworks will be problematic, right?
Problematic or more problematic than
More
maturity
problematic
framework.
than using maturity frameworks
So you in
because they
those
don't have the
yeah.
budget to mitigate the like vulnerabilities. That's what I'm.
You mean like to mitigate the important vulnerability or any vulnerabilities? If they don't have the budget
Uh,
to mitigate any vulnerabilities, then I think none of this framework is useful to them, right? But
yeah,
can
the
you elaborate
important
more
ones.
on those scenarios?
So
Mm,
let's say, for example, I have like 10 major vulnerabilities, and
yeah,
out of them, I have like budget to implement maybe say 6 to 7.
yeah.
So instead of going from a risk-based approach, what we can do is implement a like simple uh, like level 0 implementation, then go to level 1, then level 2.
Yeah, I think level 0 is where we don't want to end up, right?
Yeah,
We should
sorry,
not aim
level 1,
for,
level 2, level 3.
yeah,
Yeah,
we should not aim to
yeah.
achieve level 0. I think the level 0 is the default one that we should start with. But I think it's very interesting point, interesting scenarios. And in those scenarios, you don't have enough budget to mitigate the risk of the threat that is most important to you. And the question is, what should you do? The question is whether the risk-based framework is still useful or not. Yeah. So what do you guys think? I mean, I just want to ask the audience here, what do you guys think for that scenario? So what would be the preference? Would you still stick with the risk-based framework, or would you spend the resource try to achieve level 1 or level 2, even if it's possible? It is a tricky one thing, but I can imagine it could happen in practice. So the question is, in that case, do you think that the risk-based framework is not useful? What do you think, Shunak? I mean, this is also scenario. What is your opinion on this? What would you do in that case?
So in that case, I would go hybrid route, wherein like I will focus on the like higher risk vulnerabilities. At the same time, I will create a baseline for the ones which I have not implemented.
So you still spend the resource in the using for the risk-based framework,
Yes.
despite the fact that you don't have you mentioned that you don't have the budget to implement any of them.
Yeah, so well, let's say like I have budget for the 7, so I will
Mm,
implement the 7. But for
mm.
the ones which I don't have, I will just create guidelines or some baseline stuff just to reduce its impact. Something like that can help. That's what I'm thinking. Yes.
Okay, so in that way, does it still sort of like follow the risk-based framework too? Because as long as you give the priority to some vulnerability to some asset, then you are follow the risk-based framework. Yeah, right.
But then again, we are not able to mitigate the vulnerability completely.
Okay, that is a good point. But do you think that the risk-based framework require you to mitigate all of the risk? I mean, it's not possible, right? Even for the
Yeah.
big organization, it's not possible for them to mitigate all the risk because there's some which is not possible, like especially one concerning humans, right?
Yeah.
It's not possible to completely eliminate the risk. So one insight, one takeaway that I think that you guys will remember from the last 2 weeks is that the risk-based framework is the main purpose is for you to be clear on what are the risks and what are the priorities, right? It does not require you to completely eliminate it. It requires you to have a list and give some number to it. And if you have some control, then you can reduce that number, right? But the most important thing is that you have to maintain that list in order to balance to see like where the vulnerabilities are. Um, and so in that sense, I think the risk-based framework would still be very useful in those scenarios because in those scenarios, you're adopting the risk-based framework at the first place. That's why you can identify some vulnerability that you cannot eliminate, right? So you are already following the risk-based framework. And what you mentioned is that you adopt some baseline, sort of like the non-expensive approach to mitigate the risk that you cannot fully mitigate, right? So that is still about controlling risk as well. That is my interpretation of those scenarios. I mean, do you have any comments or other people in the room? Do you have do you want to add in to the scenarios? Okay, that's good. Okay, so let's move on. Okay, so CFS is one of the risk-based framework and is widely used by government agencies, critical infrastructure, and private organization to enhance security practice. And we will come back with the benefit of the NIST later when we contrast with some of the ISO framework. But for now, I think a quick, just a quick, what is this? What is the word? A quick glimpse of what is the main advantage of NIST is that it's free. Okay, some of the other models is not free, but NIST is completely free. And because it's free, it has been reviewed by a lot of people. And remember that one of the principles of cybersecurity is transparency, right? So you want this one to be reviewed by as many people as possible. So for some of the documents or model that is not freely available, not many people will have a chance to review them. So there could be some bugs, or could be some inconsistency in those documents that has not been identified. And that's why the main benefit of the NIST is that it has been reviewed, and so far not many complain. So it's mean that it's okay, it's quite good. So what is the main thing on this framework? This framework is divided into structure into pillars, like five pillars. There's identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover. And ideally, those cybersecurity programs should cover all of these pillars, right? Implement them as like as comprehensive as you can. And depends on how well you implement this pillar, you may be given you might be grouped in different implementation tiers. Like tier 1 is like you are partially covered. Tier 2 is risk informed. It means that any of these actions, any of these pillars, based on the risk that you identify. Right? So it's more pointed, as we discussed, it's more focused, and you clearly have a list of priorities here. So this is tier 2. So tier 3 is about repeatable. It means it's consistency. It means that it's a well documented, and if you have to do it again, it can be done again. So that's what it means by repeatable. And tier 4 is mean adaptive. It means that whatever you implement can change without a huge cost to be adaptive to new threats, for example. Yeah. So ideally, you want to be at tier 4, but I think the minimum that you should aim for is tier 2, right? Where you cover all of these pillars, and in each of these pillars, you identified the control and the threat based on and risk. Okay, so there's a question here is that can we go through tier 1 and tier 2 again? Okay, so tier 1 partial mean that maybe not all of this item in for this 4 pillar are implemented. And tier 2 risk informed mean that for all of this pillar that has been implemented, is based on risk, right? So many of this control that you implement on this pillar are based on risk. For example, when you consider the protect pillar, where it listed the thing that you need to implement, like access control, awareness, data security, info protection, process and procedure, maintenance, protective technologies. So for each of these sub-component here, as for access control, for example, you must identify like which one is most important to you. Like what sort of like access need to have higher access control than the other. So you have some priorities here, and this priority is justified by risk, and that is mean you are risk informed. Does this answer the question, Darby? I wasn't aware that the connection was dropped. Okay, great. Thank you. Okay, so again, ideally we want to be at tier 4, where it's not only risk informed, it's not only repeatable, but it is adaptive as well. Okay, so whenever you implement some of this control, it cannot be hard coded in. It needs to be flexible to change. It can be adaptive to new threats. Okay, so this is a NIST cybersecurity framework. Yeah. So the benefit of this one, beside the fact that it's free, that is it's flexible. Okay, so you can take this framework and you can apply it to the organization and see which how do you translate each of this one to the organization context. Okay, it's a follow risk management framework, so it helps. It asks the user of this framework to identify and manage the risk effectively. And one important benefit as well is that it's aligned with other standards like ISO 27001, which we will learn about shortly. Yeah, and this NIST, because it's free, so almost everyone working in the cybersecurity community should know about this. So it's provide you with the common language for communicating risk with different stakeholders and with other people in the community. Yeah, so I think I would skip this one because this is more about the governance. Okay, so government NIST has a lot of documents for different aspects of cybersecurity, and governance, as we said in week 2, is very important part of cybersecurity management. And again, NIST provide you with a framework for implementing governance. Okay, so let's move on to another model proposed by this ITIL. Forgot what is this acronym means, but it's, so L here is the library, and the T here is technology. So it's some of the standard adopt a while back. Okay, so so this organization ITIL, it also have a model, and it's called ISM, and it's designed to align information security with business needs and ensure the protection of information assets, right? And ISM is mainly designed to protect the CIA triad. I don't think this is ideal. The ISM is as popular as NIST, or as popular as the one that we will focus, that we will be going through now. So I would just skip this one for now. Okay, so now we will learn about cybersecurity architecture model. So now you can see that the terminology is getting even more confusing. We hear about the model, now we hear about architecture as well, right? So what is the difference between the architecture and models? We can spend the whole day trying to unpack the difference in this terminology, but let's not do that. And let's just try to understand what security architectures models are, right? So these models are like the prototypes, right? Some of the specification that you can use to quickly make improvement to the organization security. And some of these models are implemented in hardware, some in software, and some are policy and practices, and some of this model contain both. So in this case, in this definition of model, security architecture models mean that is a concrete instance of security architecture, right? So in this sense, the word models means something very specific, and they are like examples that you can use to guide our implementation. Okay. So why do people use the security architecture models? Actually, they use a lot in practice because it gives you assurance for security products. It's confirming that it will function and perform as stated in the vendor specification. So what it means here is that you can interpret security architecture models as certification. It's very similar to certification. And in this context, yeah, that is, you can safely use that meaning of security architecture models, i.e. certification. Okay. Because if you look at this figure, for example, what is the process of this model is like this. You are a vendor, you have a products, you develop a product, you provide some documentation, and you submit it to some laboratory, and this laboratory is run by some certification authorities, and once you submit it, it will be evaluated by these authorities, and if it's deemed acceptable, then this authority will give you a certificate, right? So each of these certification authority, they have a different security architecture model in mind, and they require the product to implement, to follow this model, this architecture strictly. And if they are satisfied that the products, as described in the docs, satisfy the security architecture models, and I mean security architecture, then they will give you a certification. Okay, and there are some certification bodies in security that are quite popular. The first one is a Trusted Computer System Evaluation Criteria, or TCSEC. TCSEC. And the next one is European instead of that one. Is European Information Technology Security Evaluation Criteria, or ITSECs. And the last one is CC. It's a common criteria. I believe CC supersede TC SECs here, but we don't need to worry about that details. Let's see what is each of these criteria have. Okay, so the first one, I think the earliest one is this TC SEC. So this TC SEC is a part of a larger series of standards, right? So they're one of the first standard out there to define clearly, to give a list of requirements of what it means to be secure, for a computer system to be trusted, right? So what it does is it defines the criteria for assessing access control in computer system. So it gives you a checklist. It gives you a requirements to implement access control. So this requirement comes in the form of hardware, firmware, and software for enforcing access control or security policy. Right? And the policy in this case is basically the rules of configuration. It's not the policy that we learn in week 4 or week 5, but you can think of it as access control policies. Like Alice can access this file and Bob cannot access this file. So that is what security policy means. And this trusted computing base or trusted computing group here, this TC-SEC, they, I think they consolidate these rules in this orange book and is considered as a cornerstone of this series. And the later books have different colors, I believe. They have a more updated rules and more updated list of requirements for access control. So what is okay, so there's an interesting discussion point here. Is called trusted computing base. I'm not sure whether we have time to discuss that, but trusted here mean that it satisfies some requirement. It does not mean that the software that had been certified by this organization is trustworthy. It's very important to distinguish between what is trusted, and what is meant by trustworthy. Right? This orange book only give you the confidence that okay, this some piece of software satisfies the requirement listed here. It does not tell you that the software is trustworthy. So it means there could be still some bugs in it, but at least that bug is not detected or is not listed in the orange book, right? So that is what this organization trying to do. And the next one, I think the latest security architecture models being used is called CC, which is an international standard. It's based on ISO, and this CC, it has a few components, and we will go through them in more detail. But there's three main one here. The first is protection profile, which is like what needs to be protected. Target evaluation, which is a product that is proposed that claim to fulfill, that claim to achieve this protection profile. And security target is a document. Well, okay, here's an overall view of how this common criteria evaluation works. So first you have some protection profile, right? And you are a vendor. You create the profile and you create a target of evaluation. You submit it to the vendor. So the target evaluation is implemented into a security target. Security target is like the product. And this is step 3. Okay, so step 4, once you implement this, you submit it to the evaluation laboratory for some certification authority. In this case, this is a CC authority. Right, so this CC laboratory, there will be some guy here working to evaluate whether this security target can satisfy this protection profile or not. In this step 5 evaluates, and if it does satisfy it, it will confirm to the CC, okay, and confirm to the certification validation body that okay, these products satisfy that protection profile, and that product will be given that certificate. Yeah. So this is very similar to this flow here, and I think it's quite clear on how this certification works. Right, so let's pause here and see if any of you have any experience applying for any of this certification, and can you share the experience with this process? Is this similar to what we have here, or did you notice any different, any links missing? I'd never have any experience with applying for certifications, but I know that some of you are here working in the industry, you may have experience. Do you think this process is complete? It makes sense, right? It makes sense to me, but if you spot any thing suspicious here, yeah, please share with us. No, I think it's all good. I think it's quite standard. I think the certification process is quite standard across all the certification. All right, so this CC, the certificate will come with different evaluation assurance level, okay? And as you can imagine, the higher the level, the better confidence that you have on the security of the product. So level 0 means that there's an adequate assurance. So it means that the product does not do what it does not guarantee what it claims to do. Right? So this is where it you don't want to end up with. The EAL of 1 mean that this this product is functionally tested, and all the way to EAL 7, where it said it's formally verified, designed, and tested. So you can see that the higher level of EAL, it's a better security guarantee, but it's more difficult to do, especially EAL level 7. It's very difficult. Why do you think that is? Do you think is feasible to achieve EAL 7 for like for a reasonably complex piece of software like Microsoft Words, for example? Do you think that it has achieved EAL level 7? Do you think Microsoft Teams had achieved this? Or do you think that even possible to achieve this? Remember, this table say that EAL 7 means that it's formally verified, designed, and tested. Is this even possible to achieve EAL 7? It must be possible in some cases, right? Otherwise, they would not list it here. Why do you think it's very difficult to achieve this EAL 7?
Any formality is always complex.
Yeah. What do you mean? What is complex? Can you say that again?
Well, if we have to kind of to the dot execute certain guidelines,
Mm,
that can sometimes be really hard depending on the company structure, on the company requirements. So it might require to build even certain new structures which company previously did not need to, but because the formally they are required, you have to implement them just for sake of that. And again, it will be hard to justify this with the company management unless they are on board to begin with.
mm. Okay. Yeah. So you say that complexity, right? Complexity of the
Yeah,
software.
complexity and also basically all requirements they always general they apply for all written to apply for all companies, so they don't take in account individual company situations
Mm,
very much. They just kind of do it broadly, just like you have to fit into this, you have to do this, and this. And unless you do what they say, there's no like really the exceptions that you can say you can justify you won't have this and still be considered valid.
okay. Yep. Yep. That's a good point. Anyone else? Anyone else want to chime in? What do you think formally here means? I mean, yeah, so maybe that you have a different interpretations of what formal means here, but let me ask you first. What do you think the word formally verified here mean? Does it mean testing or does it mean something else?
It means
Like,
testing
mm,
as a certification.
testing? So you say that is the same as certification, like certification is testing
Well, I
or
would assume that yes, that will be a certain certificate issued saying you qualify for this level of security.
okay. So here say formally verified, right? And
Yeah.
okay. All right, that's good. That's one interpretation. Anyone else? When we say something is formal in the context of computing, what do you think it means? Formal verify, formally verify. So formally verify means that it have to be proved mathematically true. So formally verify design tested means that the design and the software have to be formulated as a mathematical theorems and it had to be proved by maths, right? It cannot be done via testing. And to formulate a software program in terms of maths, theorem and axioms is like it's really difficult. And it's almost impossible to do for reasonably large piece of software because especially in the context of security, when you say it is formally verified to be secure, it's not possible, right? Because you have to enumerate all the possible attacks, and some of the attack you cannot model mathematically. So I mean, because I think one case in point is that you see many of the software that we use today, many of those software is not formally verified. I think only the critical software run in maybe in the rockets or maybe in the planes, it can be formally verified. And they are very tiny piece of software and people spend a lot of time and effort in this process. So it's not possible to do it for the last piece of software. Okay, so this was EAL7, even though it's there, I don't think many software can afford to have this level. Okay. Okay, so now let's talk about the biggest one, the ISO 27000 series. Okay, so one of the most widely referenced and discussed security model in the world. But the interesting thing is that it's not free, right? It's it's not free, and you have to pay a few hundred dollars just to access the documents specifying what this ISO standard has. Okay, and basically this documents, this ISO 27002, this document that you have to pay for, a list and describe about 133 controls. And this control used as a guideline for you to implement control in the organization. And to get the ISO standard certification, you have to get access to these documents first. Okay, and then you have to implement many, if not all, of this control to get the certification. And this organization will send someone in to make sure that you have actually implement them. It's very interesting that this is one of the most widely referenced and security models. It seems like organizations are very proud of the fact that they are certified by this ISO 27000 standards, even though many people believe that this model or this framework can be quite vague. It lacks the necessary measurement precision of a technical standards. So it describes some of this control in a sort of like layman terms. It's not um, in the technical terms. So there could be some flexibility in terms of measuring whether the control is being implemented correctly or not. And so far, there has been no reason to believe that this model is more useful than the NIST one. So yeah, but that's for this reason. I think it's very interesting to observe that it's still one of the most widely used standard out there. And I believe even though this one is free, this one is not free. In the unit side, you have access to these documents. But you, I mean, if you're not a student here, you don't have access to this unit, then you have to pay about $300 to get access to this document. This is in direct contrast to the NIST documents where you can access it for free. Yeah, so you can see that NIST security model here is publicly available at no charge, and it has been broadly reviewed by government and industry professional. Okay, so that's why people say that there's no reason to think that ISO document is better than this document. Right. Does anyone have experience with the ISO standards? Has you have experience in applying this certificate? And can you share the experience with it? As stated here, is a most widely referenced and discussed security model in practice. So if you work in this field, though, I think you must have heard about this, right? Can you share the personal experience with this ISO model with us? Anyone? I think I would like to mention here that this ISO standard is also risk-based, right? Okay, so if there's no experience with it, then we this is a thing that we need to keep in mind. So next time when you work in the industry and you come across this, someone asks you to use this model, for example, then one of the questions that you might want to ask is that why selecting this model, right? There's some other model out there as well, like the NIST security model. Okay, so next one is maintenance. Remember, the security is evolving, so you need a plan in place to evolve with the threat as well. So you need a security maintenance model, which is a guideline on how you can keep pace with the changing landscape. And here are some of the reasons why you need to be adaptive. You have to maintain the model because the organization changes. It can be you acquire new assets, right? Immersion of new vulnerabilities, and if if the organization create adjustable procedure and system, then you have to evolve with the procedure and system as well, right? So I think one of the phenomenon that you see these days, use of AI, generative AI in many of the businesses, right? And this is considered as a significant change to the business, and it's important that the security model like can accommodate those changes. Right. So there are some security maintenance model out there. You can search in the NIST website. There are a few models, few documents that you can use. And most of this model, they focus on 5 different things. I think there's some principle there that you need to implement the maintenance. Right? First, you need to monitor the threat landscape. I mean, you should not change if there's no change in the environment. So external monitoring is about um, monitoring the changes in the environment. And internal monitoring is about seeing like what changed from within, like whether there's a shuffling in terms of personnel that you need to worry about. There's some upgrade in the network and system. There's new features being introduced. So all of this will need to have some impact on the security model. So you need to know what is being changing inside the company as well. And planning and risk assessment. Okay, so it means what is say that you need to keep a plan. You have to have a plan in place. Vulnerability assessment and remediation is mean that it should be part of the risk assessment because this require you to identify new vulnerabilities. Right? So this means it should be part of the risk assessment. And readiness and review. This I think is quite straightforward. Yep. So the SB here, the special publication number 800 dash 100 is a information security handbook or guide for manager. So this one contains some nuggets about maintenance, right? Especially regarding how you have a plan in place to monitor activities for some important tasks in the companies. Okay, and it emphasizes that the task should be done on an ongoing basis. Okay, I think we will finish with some discussion on access control model. Access control is really at the heart of enterprise cybersecurity. Right? If you lose access control, you lose everything. So the access control is really like the last line of defense, right? If that one is compromised, um, if an unauthorized user can bypass the access control, then he become an insider threat, right? Then I think it's very difficult to deal with. So access control is really one of the last line of defense. So access control technically is about maintaining, about regulating admission of user into trusted area of the organization. So you can think of the organization as some part that is inside, which is trusted, have to be kept inside, and think from the outside, right? That try to gain access to the inside part. And access control is really the gatekeeper that decide who get access to the inside part. So this is a very important part for the security. So if the gatekeeper was compromised, then anyone can get in, right? Or the attacker can get in as well. So it's very important to implement the access control correctly. So the access control can protect both the logical it concerns both the logical access to the system as well as the physical access. Right? So logical access means the digital access, like through the network, or physical access means through the door. Right? Both are important. I mean, no amount of digital access control is sufficient to prevent against a guard that's opened the door to the server room to everyone. Okay? Because anyone can get in and can take out the hardware. Then no amount of like software security can help you with that. An access control model does not only consist of software, but it's and hardware, but it also consists of a policy as well, and a mean to carry out and enforce the policies. Remember the policy here in term is like the rules, right? The configuration rules, not the cybersecurity policy that we are talking about in week 4. Okay? So the key principle of access control, if you want to design or build an access control system, this is a principle that you should adhere to. They are not strict requirement, but if you violate any of this principle, then it's a red flag. Okay, so the first principle is job rotation. Next is task rotation, mandatory vacation. Now, separation of duties and principle of least privilege. Okay, so now is a very good time to pause here and discuss this principle. What do you think this separation of duties means in the context of access control? Separation of duty, like having two people with two different jobs, right? Why is this an important part of access control? Or can you think of a counter example where if you don't have separation of duty, it could lead to a breach of access control?
Well, you have if you have duty separated, you can reduce login capabilities of each account to only whatever they need for this for the duty. In this case, if one of those will be hacked, the attacker will not be able to access anything else besides what this person's permissions are.
Okay.
So we limit basically power of the account, and therefore limit impact of the hack of this account.
Okay, so you limit the power of the accounts. Okay. And the counter example is when one of the account is hacked, right? Okay, that's a good example. Any other example for the separation of duties? Have you seen the separation of duty in practice? Have you seen an implementation of this in practice?
Well, I try to never create like a super user account if I don't have to, which does everything, and kind of create only accounts for whatever need to happen.
Okay.
And not all systems allow that.
So a good example of separation of duties would be like AWS ACL, like access control list, wherein only like selected items are giving allow access and all others are blocked.
Oh, but can you say that example again? You said that AWS, right? But I missed the rest. Can you repeat
Yeah,
that, please?
so basically what we can do is we can allow selected rules for that
Okay.
individual virtual machine, and all other items are blocked by default. So we will give it only the privileges which it wants and nothing more. At the same time, we will not give it access to all of our other infrastructures. In that way, we can create separation of duties for that individual VM.
So I think the example is related to another principle, but can you explain how is this? What is the duties in the example?
So,
what he
for
says.
example, if we have a service which transforms our images into like low scaled version, like maybe an icon.
Hmm.
So what we want it to give access is, let's say we have given it an S3 access, but we don't want it to access any of our other infrastructures.
Hmm.
So in that case, we will give it only that permission.
Mm. I think what you
That's what we
mentioned
want.
here is the principle of least privilege, where for one account you limit what it can do, right?
Yeah, like they go like they both go hand in hand. Like
Mm.
we wherever we do separation of duties, we need to ensure that minimum like only the uh, permissions are given for it which are required for it to do its job.
Yeah. So I think separation of duties implies a case where you need two or more people to do one job. You need them to come together to do one job. But what you mentioned is a principle of least privilege, where you only give the access to do the job and not anymore, right? So I think it's a good example of another principle here. Um, but I think when it comes to separation of duty, um, what we want is an example where one person cannot do it, but you need two or three more different people to do it. Okay, so is there any of those example that you have seen in practice?
Well, in practice, probably would be, say we have a cloud admin who only
Mm.
does work with cloud. We can
Mm-hmm.
have network admin. We can have just, let's say, personal security admin. So there can be persons who does only part of the job, and that definitely separates whatever each of them can and cannot do. So the account becomes less powerful for general.
Mm.
But also it creates basically, as I look at it, a kind of a similar principle why, let's say, filming crews has so many people in production all the time. Like
Mm.
there can be one person only to responsible to watch the costumes or watch the lighting, and this is for that because no one can remember everything, and if
Mm.
one person has too many duties, they can overlook something. So by creating more people, we essentially creating ensuring that there's less mistakes. So and basically in high environment, when basically even in the same movie set, when a day of the production costs thousands of, like $10,000 or $100,000 because of high equipment and everything else, you don't want definitely to lose all your production day just because some costume was someone forgot to leave a cup or, like, or remove the
Okay.
cup from the
Yeah.
table.
Mm.
Um, and same as here, you you give people to kind of be more focused on the role, more focused on some even smaller part, but something they do very well in this case.
Mm.
And in this case, you ensure that everyone stays professional, stays out of the game. No one is burned out because they have too much things to work for.
Okay. Yeah.
Hmm.
I think one of the more um, relevant example would come from military. I think can you think of an example that is from the military? From the military, you might have seen this a lot in movies. Um, anything comes in mind? Yeah.
When the hierarchy in military.
Uh, the hierarchy is different, right? So one is a boss, the other
Hmm.
is not the boss. So it's not a separation of duty because the boss can always
Mm.
tell the other what to do, right?
But
But
there are diff.
remember if you, I mean, imagine that would you give the key to a nuclear launch to one single person, like the president or
Not of
one
course.
general,
Mm. There
right?
always should be multiple eyes.
Yeah.
But
So
that's different. That says to man control below it,
yeah,
right?
so this is separation of duty mean that you need two or three men to come together to agree
Mm.
on to do the job, right? You need to separate it out so that they have a check and balance. So it means that, as you said earlier, if one is compromised, not only on the account but compromised personally, then the other can still sort of like check it. So yeah, separation of duty is important in that sense. And if you if you use some cryptocurrencies, for example, there's a feature called threshold signatures, where you can only sign the transaction if you have 2 or 3 different keys, right? So it means that you can give the key to one person, another key to another person, and both of the people have to come to agree to sign the transaction. It's like the joint account. Yeah, I think joint account is a better example, where if you and the partner open up a joint bank account, then both of you hold a signature, right? And so it's, if you want to sign off on one transaction, both of you have to come in. Both of you will have to sign off on that transaction for it to be valid, right? So that avoids the impact of one person being compromised, and that happens a lot in real life with social engineering and stuff like that. So that's why separation of duty is very important. Okay, and yeah, I think it's very similar to two-man control here as well. Okay, so you need 2 person to do a job, not because the job is too heavy, but you want to make sure that check and balance. And the principle of least privilege is what I think um, Sunak has mentioned earlier. It's about giving the person only the permission necessary to do his job, right? And no more. And this principle is easier said than done, because one counterexample to this principle is our Linux server or the Windows system. It does not uphold to this principle. All right, so here are some category of access control. You have a solution, and you can categorize it into some of these boxes: like preventive, deterrent, detective, corrective, recovery, and compensating. I mean, the best that you should aim for is preventive, but it's not always possible, right? Given the attacker can change and the vulnerability changes. So it's not always possible. And sometimes you have to do like recovery and corrective. Yeah, you let it happen, and then you have something to handle it, to respond to it. And that's the best that you can do. Okay. I think yeah. So here's some of the key takeaway of this week is that there's a lot of reference model out there that you can use to start with implementing the cybersecurity program. So yeah, so take a look at them. And I think there's no one size fit all model. So sometimes you have to mix and match, really based on the organization context, right? So that means it still rely on domain expertise, on the experience. So the longer you work in the field, the better you will have at assembling different components from different models. And that is the end of today. Okay, so we have like 1 or 2 minutes for question if you have any.
We have actually a question about
Yeah.
the third assignment. We're trying to estimate the value of the assets, but we found out we don't really sure what are those assets, because we're not sure should we follow the same company which was looking at assignment 1 and 2, which was the original brief, or it's if we can invent company. What's how the
I think it is the same company. Yeah. This is definitely the same company.
Yeah, because in that brief, it doesn't really say what the company revenue is. It only says how many people they have, how many leads they have, but it don't say how much is the revenue, which is important for certain. If you try to evaluate assets, like revenue is important for certain models.
Yeah, I agree. That's important. And anything that is not specified, then you can make assumption. As long as you are clear about the assumption, you state the assumption that I assume that this is revenue. I assume this is how many people. That is fine.
So we have to, in this case, provide some ground for this assumption, right?
Yeah. Yeah. It's pretty much
Okay.
open. If it's not specified, then it's a advantage to you to make assumption.
Okay, cool. Thank you very much.
Okay. Is there other questions? Okay, if not, then thanks everyone for joining. I will see some of you guys tomorrow, but if not, then I will see you guys next week. All right. Have a good day. Bye.